The proceeding is currently...
To the Scottish Affairs Committee, to the postponed session in Science in Scotland with a couple of representatives from the funding organisations, which I'll now allow to introduce themselves and anything by way of a short statement. We'll start with you, Professor Dame Corner.
Hello, I'm Jessica Corner, and I'm Executive Chair of Research England, one of the 9 councils for UKRI. I'm here in my capacity as a lead for UKRI for Place. I've got a long career spanning more than 40 years across all sorts of different universities and research institutes to bring to bear, and with leadership roles in health and other things. And as my day job is to be responsible for Research England, which funds English universities for their research.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Cross.
Hi, I'm Helen Cross. I'm Director of Research and Innovation at the Scottish Funding Council. I was formerly a civil servant and worked in the science, the predecessors of the current science department, Biz and Bays. I worked in UKRI for 5 years, and I was delighted. I went to university at Glasgow to come back to Scotland last year and join the Scottish Funding Council.
Excellent. Thank you for your very concise introductions. Just basic questions to get things started. Maybe you could just start by telling us what your organisations do to support scientific researchers in Scotland. We'll start with you, Dame Corner.
Sure, yes. Well, as you know, UKRI is the national funding body for research and innovation and covers 9 research councils that range across the disciplinary specialist research councils like the Medical Research Council through to Innovate UK, which funds business to translate and support innovation in the business community and from research. I think there's a long history of working with the excellent funding and research base across Scotland. UKRI supports and funds directly, I think, 6 institutes and centres. So there's very deep involvement and support for excellent research in Scotland. I mean, to give you a couple of examples would be the Rosalind Institute at the University of Edinburgh, which last year was given an extra 35 million from BBSRC, one of the research councils. There's the UK Astronomy Technology Centre at the Royal Observatory in Edinburgh, which is funded by the Science and Technology Funding Council. And then another example would be the Edinburgh Parallel Computing Centre. So, there's very, very large research investments and assets in Scotland, and a long history of working with really, really superb facilities in science.
And lots of very good things about UKRI and the support you've been given Scottish science. Maybe the same question to you, Ms. Cross. How exactly do you operate, and how do you fund Scottish research?
So the role of the Scottish Funding Council is to fund higher and further education in Scotland, universities and colleges. And when it comes to research and innovation, I think we sort of form a complementary part of the system with UKRI, but our funding goes mainly via block grants to universities so that they have the capacity and capability to be able to employ people, build basic infrastructure, and I guess have a portfolio of research that allows them to apply for grants from UKRI.
And this is all through what's called the REF, the Research Excellence Framework.
Some of it is through the REF. So the REF is a UK-wide system for assessing research quality, and we work together, the 4 funding bodies across the UK, to do that. And some of our money is awarded as a result of that, and that's called REG in Scotland.
And do you two work with each other? Do you know each other well? And
we certainly do,
familiar with each other's operation? And
absolutely, and we have shadow status on each other's boards. We're regularly in touch with each other. We share best practice. And actually the 4 funding bodies design and administer the Research Excellence Framework as just described collectively. So, yeah, there are many activities in common, and I would like to say it's a great collaboration. Helen should speak for herself, yes.
Because what we've heard is that Innovate UK could do more to coordinate funding projects with other organisations, including Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise. What's UKRI doing, Professor Corner, to support a more joined-up approach to funding projects such as that?
So I think there's ongoing collaborative work and forums by which we come together to understand what the priorities are of different parts of the system with Scottish colleagues. I mean, in relation to Innovate UK funding, it is one part of the system where perhaps the success rates are slightly different in terms of the overall funding that Scottish businesses are receiving, because that's what Innovate UK funds rather than institutions or research centres. And we think it might be to do with the sort of makeup of the business community within Scotland is slightly different than other parts of the country.
More SMEs that you're referring
yes,
to. I think we're going to come to...
Helen might do it. But also, though, so to try and work on that harder, Innovate UK has recently established a memorandum of understanding with Scottish Enterprise, so that there's kind of greater join-up and collaboration between the two kinds of activities that are different by those organisations in order to optimise it.
We had the Minister in last week just to discuss some of the funding-related issues with him, and one of the things that came out of that is that researchers in England are more successful than researchers in Scotland for securing this funding. And he said something which maybe you could elaborate on and tell us what you think. Is he said when they compete, this is Scottish researchers, they're successful. Let us have more of them showing up, was the direction that he was sort of giving to Scottish researchers and projects. So is that sort of the case that, you know, like we'll want to see more of the Scottish science projects turning up to try and secure research funding? And is it the case that when they do show up, they tend to be successful?
So if you look at success rates to any of the funding councils for the whole of UKRI, actually Scottish academics perform very, very well and have a success rate higher than English academics, actually, as a total. They on an award value, so a project by project value, that might be somewhat less, although it is higher than Wales and Northern Ireland, so it's not as if it's necessarily that much lower, but there is a difference. So there's maybe something about the number of applications that are coming in and the scale of those applications. But I suppose you also have to look at, well, what's the makeup of the institutions and the research groups? I mean, Helen might want to talk to this. You know, is there something that we need to do about them? But it's not on an academic for academic competitive basis. Yes. Scottish academics are excellent.
Yes, again, that was stressed to us, but there was this sort of point that, you know, like not enough institutions are making these applications. And I think there was a gentle encouragement from the Minister for more of them to think about coming forward. Is that your experience in this?
So I think that you've talked quite a lot with people in this inquiry about Innovate UK. As Jessica set out, Innovate UK's target audience, who they're wanting people to apply, is primarily businesses. So it's not academics or research groups. And I think that whilst more people could apply, we should also trust people to know which of the opportunities are right for them. In Scotland, we have a high SME base, and so they are very successful in winning funding when they apply. There might be opportunities that are not right for those sorts of businesses. There might be opportunities that are more appropriate for larger scale research intensive firms, and it is for, I guess, Innovate UK and other funders to make sure that there's a full portfolio of opportunities available for businesses, and for businesses to look for the ones that are right for them.
And just lastly from me, and it's again to Professor Corner, I mean, do you think there's a need for a UKRI wide presence in Scotland? Would we benefit from that, given what we've heard about some of the excellence we have in science projects and some of the issues around funding?
So, as a whole, and this is something I lead on for UKRI, we're looking at how we engage in order to ensure that we are supporting the distribution of funding across the whole of the UK. As you know, it has traditionally been a bit more concentrated in the Greater South East, and we're absolutely wanting to make sure that it's well distributed to all parts of the UK. In Scotland, there are actually engagement managers for two of the councils, EPSRC and Innovate UK, so they're very active on the ground, connecting. And we do various things to try and make our presence more so. But certainly, yes, we are looking to see how should we optimise that approach in future so that all of the councils, all of the opportunities are fully, present to all bodies, institutions, research centres, businesses that might want to access them.
What would that eventually look like, do you think? Is that a building with people in it? And
we think unlikely that we will put up buildings in this virtual world that we now live in. That may not be the most optimal way of creating the right presence. But certainly we're looking at how we can create a team of engagement managers that can talk to the whole of the offer and make that much more sort of visible and coordinated in the way we approach that to all parts of the country. So that would probably be our approach. But also looking at other forums and meetings and collective activities that we could do to actually have more of a conversation. Our Chief Executive, Ottilie Laser, is now regularly holding events in different parts of the whole country, and has done that not too long ago, actually in Dundee, where UKRI came and held an event on the ground and met very senior people, including the Minister for Education and others, while there, to have that sort of on-the-ground conversation, which I think is another way of hearing about what the great assets and opportunities are, while us sort of trying to connect with the kind of funding that might move towards them.
one example that was sort of given to us was the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, which was praised for its engagement with the research community in Scotland. How can UKRI spread this good practice across other research councils?
So we have a strategy steering group now that is directed solely to look at how we do this engagement across the whole country and how we think about the strategy for investment. So that's the sort of environment we're continually listening to different councils and the way they're doing really good practice and great innovations, so that all other parts of UKRI can learn from them, put them into practice, but also to be more coordinated and have a more upfront strategic plan to do it, I would say.
Thank you. Helen Brown.
Thanks, good afternoon. Just want to touch on region appetite across Scotland. Now, you can imagine, given my politics, I bristle sometimes in Scotland's almost classified as a region in itself, but clearly there's variation right across Scotland. And even we heard from Professor Brown from University of St Andrews, and he said from down south Scotland looks like one region, but Scotland's more than one place, and we need to be able to express place in a way that fits the research problems that we're talking about. So for yourself, Professor Corner, just wondering if you can elaborate about how you make sure you've got an up-to-date understanding of the research ecosystem across Scotland, how it actually does vary from region to region.
Yes, absolutely. And these are the sort of using our colleagues who are on the ground and connecting with institutions and the ecosystem directly, holding regular forums where we can get together with groups of different organisations and institutions to hear those things, and just doing it on a very regular basis. It is really important. There's a lot of ground to cover, but yes, that nuance between all the different types of institutions and research centres in Scotland is very important, because they don't all have the same strengths, and we need to understand them. I don't know if Helen would add anything to that.
And I think for me, it was something that attracted me to going back to Scotland, because there are 18 institutions that we fund to do research, and we also work with the Open University in Scotland, and that means that I can engage with each institution on a regular basis and have a conversation about their areas of expertise, about regional differences, how they interact with their local communities and the challenges that they face, and I find that really valuable.
When you ever done analysis that maybe shows that one region's doing much better than another, or other areas are maybe not accessing as much funding, and then changing how you're targeting and engaging, to rectify these things, or building best practice?
I guess that would be something that might sit in your domain, Helen.
What I would say is, in terms of sort of assessing and understanding Scotland's research strengths and weaknesses, I think that the REF is the biggest tool that we have in our bag to do that, and we share that. And we last did that in 2021, and we're still looking at and understanding the rich picture that it gives us. We published SFC some case studies late last year that looked at how the impact of the research carried out in institutions was seen across Scotland, and different activities that had resulted from that research. It's really fascinating when you look at where institutions get their money from. So, I often say that broadly, SFC gives institutions about a quarter of their research money, and about a quarter of it comes from UKRI. But actually that differs quite a lot across different institutions, and some universities get more of their money from charities, those that do lots of biomedical research, for example. Some get more from the public sector, and they do more work in their local communities and sort of, I guess, public good work. And just looking at the differences between them and talking about how they implement that has been really fascinating.
Okay, thanks for that. I suppose kind of building on that, so other written and oral evidence we've heard suggested recommendations, a mapping exercise, I suppose, to get that further understanding and pin down the regional variation. So as a mapping exercise, is that something any of you have undertaken, any of your organisations?
We probably do slightly different things. I think for UKRI, we use tools like the Research Excellence Framework outcomes, for example, which gives a very, very comprehensive picture of research as conducted through universities. There's also quite a lot of work that's been going on trying to understand where clusters of innovation are emerging. So what are the combined areas and things that are sort of building up that sit around a sort of innovation ecosystems, and understanding them. And so work goes on in that respect. It's not region specific, it's actually trying to look at the whole of the UK system picture and know where those strengths are. That sort of activity does go on. And then I suppose there's a third sort of activity, which is trying to get the leaders of institutions and organisations across different sectors to come together to talk about what strategies are, what are the priorities of those organisations and locations, and then how do they interface in with the way government might be thinking about priority technologies, for example, or UKRI in terms of the delivery of its own strategy. So I think it's multi-layered, the way we do this. And then each particular competitive funding call will look in competition about which are the best proposals that seem to be going forward in those areas. And then there are certainly very important, very significant strategic investments that are made. A very good example would be the Archer 2 supercomputing facility in Edinburgh, in the Parallel Computing Centre, and the recent announcement to invest and scale up supercomputing and making Edinburgh the very important centre for that to be started off, which will give us sort of 50 times size supercomputer for the UK, and it's going to be based in Edinburgh, so that's a sort of very strategic decision about an investment. So I think it's sort of multi-layered. Those decisions are made out of looking at where the best place and the excellence and the capability to position something like that would be.
Okay. Helen, do you want to add anything about mapping exercise?
Well, I think, in terms of this idea of mapping, I think it's important to understand that it's not a once and done thing. You couldn't make a perfect map of where the research excellence is, because we sort of did that in 2021, but it's already changing, and different people want different information. So there is both the UK and Scottish Government have their own sort of cluster map exercises going on, and they're trying to interrogate different questions. We fund an organisation called Interface, which helps businesses that want to grow and use academic expertise to sort of link up with academics. And they have really sophisticated systems, but the landscape that they're looking at is always changing. The cutting edge is always changing, so we can't stop doing this.
And you both mentioned innovation clusters there. There's also a suggestion that perhaps Scottish Government and UK Government need to coordinate or work better together going forward on this. Is that a charge that any of you recognise, or is there any considerations that need put forward?
I think understanding around, first of all, what innovation clusters are and how they best develop and how they can best be supported is an emergent area, actually, and the evidence around how to do that is emergent. I think our respective governments are very interested in that and are trying to understand where the opportunities may lie. For sure, there is more opportunity to join up that thinking and do more with it, because this is going to become more and more of a priority. How do we make strategic choices about investments in order to grow our respective economies?
Okay, Helen, you want to add anything? If it just move on to funding, this is for yourself, Professor Corner. This has come up time and again, and it probably won't surprise you, but it's about proportion of funding. So Scotland's got 11.4% of researchers in the UK, but actually receives 5.9% of Innovate UK funding. So is Scotland's proportion of Innovate UK funding is actually fair and proportionate given the amount of researchers Scotland actually provides?
Yeah, so there are different ways of it. So you specifically picked out the Innovate funding, which is funding to business rather than to other aspects of the research and innovation system. Actually, those figures are over quite a long time, but actually if you compare that statistic to the proportion of the business population, there's probably a closer match, actually, between the funding and the size of that. So it is smaller, but it might not be so distant a gap as might seem might seem to suggest, but it does suggest there's more work to do there. I think in terms of the whole of UKRI funding, actually, I think Scotland is doing pretty well. It ranks 4th or 5th in the 12 regions of the country. And in terms of its success rates, as we were already saying, is very good. So, there are differences depending on whether you look at the Innovate UK or the total funding. So I think the picture's pretty good. Some of the data I think that you might have seen for this committee was over a long period of time. We're particularly looking at the last 2 years, for example, where there's been something like a 20% increase in funding to Scotland, which is larger than the overall increase to the UKRI budget as a whole. So there are good things going on.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, arguably, if you've got a smaller share of the pie, it's easier to get a slightly bigger increase, even though it's still kind of lagging behind. I was curious when you're saying, rather than look at it as proportion of researchers, you said if you look at it in a business context, Scotland does better. So can you explain what you mean in that regard?
It might go back to the things we were saying earlier about the mix of business. This is because that relates to Innovate UK funding, which is targeted at business. It might be a factor of the nature of the businesses in Scotland being rather different to those in England or other parts of the UK that create that effect. I think it's something that we'd want to do more work on to understand it properly and make sure, if we're going to do some interventions around it to try and change the picture, what the best ones should be, which is why this sort of joint working between different parties like Scottish Enterprise and Innovate UK is being formed, the work being formed there.
Okay, because on that business landscape, another very common theme that come out is that businesses in Scotland tend to be SMEs, so Scotland's got a much higher reliance in proportion to SMEs that make up the business sector. So how do you factor that into decision making about funding from UK MRI?
So that would be the nature of the Innovate UK funding. Another feature is that there's probably fewer of the large research and development intensive businesses in Scotland than perhaps in other parts of the UK, which again might mean that they're less likely to seek funding for research and development kinds of activities from the funding body. Again, I don't know whether, Helen, there's anything that you would add on that.
So I think it is about scale and resources. Obviously, SMEs do conduct R&D, but in order to be able to, I guess, access some grants, you have to be able to match fund in order to, I guess, stay within subsidy control rules. And that can be a barrier to SMEs participating in some of those schemes. Also, just having the scale and capacity to be able to do that.
Yeah. And going forward, so I'm not in any way looking to how that would change. I take your point about subsidy and match funding, but is there not a way then to actually still help SMEs access money, but obviously grow? Because that's the end desire, isn't it, to grow and have successful outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course they need to be research and development active companies. So there's something possibly around the development of those companies in that space to make sure that that they can take up the offer that is there. The growing of the companies, that is not so much within the territory of UKRI, probably. I mean, there are probably other features that may be beyond the scope of the remit of UKRI that need to be addressed, and that's certainly perhaps something the committee would want to explore.
Thanks.
Thank you. Wendy Chamberlain wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and welcome both. I think reflecting on Alan Brown's questions there is, it sounds to me that there's something around giving the businesses support rather than necessarily the institutions. So how do the businesses make those connections into institutions, and indeed how potentially Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Islands Enterprise might help to do that? It's probably to yourself, Helen. Is there the capability within Scottish Enterprise and HIE that would be able to deliver that in your view?
Yes. So I mean, I guess in SFC we provide research and innovation funding into universities. We don't, I guess, fund businesses directly, but our funding helps to support sort of business development offices and technology transfer offices, and helps, I guess, things like spin-outs start happening in universities and help academics connect with businesses to help them grow. We work, I guess, hand in hand with the enterprise agencies in Scotland, because they do, that is their job, is to fund the business end of that connection. But we have investments in common where we are, I guess, supporting just that, the transfer of knowledge and skills into businesses to help them innovate and grow.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of what the Chair said in relation to institutions turning up, businesses turning up, it does sound that there's some work from a Scottish Government perspective to make sure that they can do that and actually come to the table and then make successful application. That's a fair assessment? I
think that the Scottish Government published an innovation strategy this year where they express the need to do that. Just that, it's grow more businesses, more successful businesses, help grow the Scottish economy, and I'm sure part of that sort of mix is being more successful in bringing in money, including from Innovate UK.
Great. Everybody pulling in the right direction. Thank you.
Eliane Hart.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our panel. The UK is very good at setting up businesses and not quite so good at growing them, and witnesses have told us that startups and spin-outs need greater access to scale-up capital. Can you tell me how you're supporting these businesses, these companies, to do this? Professor Dame Corner.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose So there's great interest in this, and as you know, there was an independent review of how spin-out companies are formed via universities. What are the factors that make them successful? Are there interventions to be done to sort of speed that journey right through to the scale-up? And there was a response to that published last November. As far as sort of UKRI and through to the sort of Innovate UK territory, the work is mostly about the formation of those companies from, a discovery right through to the company being formed and then getting underway and being successful. Less so at the scale-up end of that, because I think there's multiple things that need to be in place to make the environment, as conducive as it possibly could be to enable companies to scale, and that's an area that everybody has said is in need of addressing. Some of it, though, is out of scope actually for the UKRI sort of portfolio of activities, other than to understand it, recognise it, and pull out the features of what might need to be in place.
Thank you. Ms. Cross.
So, as I've said already, SFC's support is inside universities. I guess one example that I would pull out is Scottish Enterprise's High Growth Spin-Out Programme, which, yes, I think it's a very good programme, sort of helping spin-outs find a clear pathway to market, supporting research teams to commercialise their ideas and making them not just businesses but successful businesses. I think they recently published a report which shows the best ever figures, including sort of 14 companies in the recent period seeing that continuing growth, leveraging £35 million of private investment and undertaking £9 million worth of R&D activities, which is very, very positive. I think Scottish Enterprise was named in a recent Royal Academy of Engineering report as a top investor in spin-outs.
And how does the Scottish Government's High Growth Spin-Out Programme fit in with the UK Government's funding?
Do you want to answer that?
So I think
who to ask?
Yeah, yes.
Which one to ask for
I
that?
can start and then I shall pick up.
So I think in terms of sort of how the funding for spin-outs and startups interlocks in Scotland and in England and through the UK-wide schemes, there's not. I don't think that there's a problem in terms of eligibility for funding. We support a programme called Converge, which helps that sort of initialisation of ideas in universities, and UKRI in Innovate UK support a programme called iCure, which does a similar thing. And the people that sort of run those programmes, they work together, and people can sort of transfer between these schemes to get the knowledge and the learning that they need. And we've seen examples of that happening and those businesses spinning out and growing.
Thank you. And Professor Dame Corner.
Yeah, I think the journey of a discovery becoming into a successful company and onwards is complicated and has many sort of steps along the way, of which, when you trace the journey of successful spin-out companies, you see they've had many inputs and many different kinds of funding that are targeted at different stages of that process, of which this, I think, the two schemes sort of fitting together is a good example. In fact, actually, Scotland does really pretty well. We've got, I think there's something like 1,167 spin-out companies that have been part of the UKRI family of funded initiatives, of which 133, it's 1 in 10 of them, are actually Scottish spin-out companies, attracting a lot of grant funding and private equity into them. University of Edinburgh is very much one of the top 6 universities in the country for doing this kind of activity, and part of an initiative called 10U, which was has been signalled in the government response, the spin-out review of spin-outs, around developing best practice around what should be done to smooth that journey and make it work much better than perhaps it has done. So, and Edinburgh was, one of the participants in designing that guidance. So you can see that there's very active, there's very good work going on. What we want is for that to be going on more, and kind of across, greater parts of the system, really.
So, I mean, just looking at at that sort of spinning out and going through into the commercialisation process and then scaling up, should the UK and or both Scottish governments establish clear pathways to market from university spin-outs? Is there anything that can be done to help that along a bit?
Well, so the review came up with 11 or 12 different recommendations, which cover quite a range of things, from things like proof of concept funding, which help an idea get designed for market, which the government has given 20 million to sort of set that up, and it'll be open to everybody, through to things like asking universities to adopt best practice approaches to equity splits and other aspects of developing and supporting companies to get off the ground, through to we're working to establish actually a register of spin-out companies across the country, and we're hoping that we will make that a UK-wide initiative, just so we can begin to really understand, with more evidence and data, actually what are the factors that make that go faster and better than other things. It's quite a hotly debated area, and we haven't actually got all the best evidence as to precisely what we should do to make this all work as well as it can.
They must attract capital funds.
What I would say is that I think that everybody would like there to be a very simple linear answer way. If you struck something really soundly at the beginning, then there'd be a chain effect, and then you'd have a brilliant. But I think in different sectors and for different opportunities, there are different pathways. In some ways, in some things like, I don't know, life sciences, it's quite regimented because there are the regulatory barriers, and you have to follow a certain path if you want to take a product to market. Others, actually, the journey's much quicker, and that sort of intense venture capital investment is not required. So I think a one size fits all answer would never be appropriate for all types of opportunity that's coming out from our university sector. However, I think I think that there has been guidance in the past, and could be more helpful guidance in the future to lower the barriers.
Thank you. Are there other... I know Professor Dame Corner responded to one of my colleagues' questions about looking at best practice in other counties, I think you said, or maybe other countries.
It's probably both, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, because both other parts of it, well, across the system, and there's also been a look at other countries. Yeah.
So they must have higher education institutions that are very successful at scaling up university technologies. I wonder how they do it. Are they more ahead than us, or just different? Yeah,
well, it's very interesting. So, we'd all look to MIT, Stanford, Silicon Valley environments. Actually, when we've looked at the data in terms of the number of spin-out companies that are being developed successfully for the head of academic population, actually, the UK performs pretty similarly. It's a question of scale that's different, as you can imagine. And I think the availability of capital to invest in those companies is just of a different order in places like MIT, Stanford, Silicon Valley. So it's not the same environment, but it's not because we're not doing it well. We are actually doing it very well, but we have a relatively small number of universities that are very, very active and doing this. And it reflects the R&D base of those universities, actually. The more there is, the more they're likely to be doing it. And there's been long-standing support for universities through different funding models, different in Scotland to it is in England, for example, but that supports the technology transfer offices and the infrastructure to enable this. So I think what we're doing at the moment is not saying that it's wrong, it's saying actually how do we optimise it and make it smoother, make the difficult bits work better than they have. Very keen to encourage a wider and more diverse and inclusive set of entrepreneurs thinking about doing this as part of what would be a career opportunity. That's a job to be done. More women, for example, thinking of spinning out companies themselves. You know, all of those things need to be done. So it's a question of sort of doing better with what we do, not saying it isn't any good, because it is actually pretty good.
Brilliant. And last question. We've heard that just looking at optimising it, we've heard that a lack of infrastructure, notably incubators and lab space, is acting as a push factor for spin-outs and start-ups in Scotland. Would you agree with that? Can I go to Miss Cross first?
So I think that our universities are very good at incubating, I guess, spin-outs that are to be. So they're very good at looking after companies before they are properly established at companies. I think that there is an opportunity to do more, and when businesses are growing quickly, they want to be able to grow where they are. They want to be able to expand their space, and sometimes that can't be offered where they are. I'm absolutely sure there is an opportunity to do more in that space.
Okay, thank you. And Professor Dame Corner.
Yeah, I mean, I probably know less about the on the ground in Scotland than Helen does, but certainly it is an issue in different parts of the UK, and it depends a bit on the specialisation around a particular university ecosystem, for example. So there can be, I think there has been quite a lot of development of the right sort of incubator spaces. I think as companies grow, they need to grow into bigger accommodation. Depends on whether they're engineering and manufacturing focused or something else, or if it's software, that's easy. So I think that there's a job to do to work on what all of that infrastructure should look like and try and develop it. And certainly now that we're all looking for actually growing the economy, it's going to be more and more important. So yes, absolutely, we need to be working on it.
Thank you. Thank you. No further questions.
Actually, just a really brief question, just on the subject of the international dimension of all of this. Is there any mechanism or structure in place that would help to facilitate, say, for example, a Scottish university or spin-out doing like a collaboration or a joint venture with a similar body in Europe or in North America? Or do they just have to kind of find their own way? Or is there anyone that they could go to that could, sort of help line that up and hold hands and do negotiations for them? Or is it just up to each institution or individual?
Are you referring to a spin-out company or a research collaboration?
Either really, so it's like, thinking from an export point of view, I mean, often companies, they do really well in domestic setting when they're having those conversations about getting into overseas and different legislations and legal things. That can become quite frightening, off-putting. Yeah. And sometimes they need someone to hold their hand and do that piece of encouragement. So from an innovative or research or attracting capital point of view, again, there could be barriers in place, could be equally daunting and so on. So how do we introduce Scottish institutions or companies to potentially the best, the brightest opportunities for joint ventures or collaboration or partnerships, that sort of thing? And I'm thinking particularly Europe or North America or Japan potentially. Is there any sort of structure like that exists?
So I guess research is innately a collaborative endeavour, and I think that a lot of the collaborations that come into sort of emergent businesses are from existing research collaborations that happen. That said, there is an infrastructure beyond that, and with Scottish Enterprise and Scottish Development International, there is opportunities for businesses to be supported to go on trips and make new connections and build those collaborations too. Obviously, at the moment, at the forefront of all of our minds is our association with Horizon Europe, and to be able to forge those partnerships again is really important. And we've been talking a lot in the last couple of months about what we can do. SFC obviously our focus is on universities and their partnerships, but that reaches out because, actually, whilst we've had really good support from UKRI on the guarantee around Pillar 1 schemes and the ERC, it's actually the multi-partner collaborative bit of Horizon Europe that we really need to make the ground.
Yeah. And so just to add on to that, and you can maybe answer the two things together, sort of Professor Corner. Again, is there any mechanism that would allow, or someone that would help to facilitate, that access to foreign capital into, the Scottish universities or into Scottish innovators or spin-outs? For example, someone that could help to navigate the way through Gulf state sovereign wealth funds, for example, and the Mubadalas and these types of people that could attract, high amounts of capital into specific projects. Is there anyone that would help with that?
So I'm not sure there's a structure that is designed to do precisely that. I think it's inherently in different opportunities and how they develop, and there will be different partners to come together. I was going to give one example. I don't know whether it quite fits your sort of the international dimension quite what you're looking for, but there is a scheme called the UK Research Partnerships Investment Fund, UK RPIF, which Research England actually runs on the part of the UK, which is a scheme that is for universities to identify a development they would like to put forward in the research partnership sort of arena, set up a building and whatever infrastructure facility they want to do with it. It has to be done with every £1 we might give to it, with £2 from private sector investment for a particular purpose. So in the summer we announced one of these awards to the University of Strathclyde, which was 11 million with a 23.7 co-investment for continuous manufacturing and advanced crystallization data lab, which is about medicines manufacturing. And it was with AstraZeneca, GSK and Pfizer. So, I think when you use those companies, you're talking about a global effort with investment, R&D investment, but around that particular. So that's just an illustrative scheme, of which there are other things like that, but this one's quite unique, where it absolutely sets out to create the conditions where you can get that partnership investment in a building, all set up with all the facility equipment that it needs to get that off the ground. Very exciting, actually, and it was great to award that one to Scotland.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Douglas.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to our witnesses. Ms Cross, could I start with you? You were previously with UKRI and now with the Scottish Funding Council. So I was wondering what you made of the letter from the Principal of Glasgow University to the Scottish Government back in October last year, which was comparing the two in the increases. And he said, Sir Anton Muscatelli said, while Scotland continues to do well in securing funding from the UK's major research funder, UKRI, data suggests that Scotland's share of total UKRI grant income to universities has gradually declined over the past decade. While the UK government has increased its spend in research and development and grown UKRI's overall budget, this has not been echoed to the same extent in Scotland. So, given your experience of both bodies, what's your response to that?
So, I recognise that description. It is true that the share of UKRI funding, or from the bodies that made up UKRI, because UKRI has only existed for 5 years, Scotland's share has fallen, but it's in terms of the amount of money, that amount of money has grown. So what it may recognise, and I don't think we are clear on the data yet, is that the organisations that UKRI funds are becoming more diverse. So while Scotland's universities have continued to grow absolutely the amount of money that they get from UKRI, UKRI is funding a greater diversity of organisations. So actually, Scotland's universities are winning slightly less of a proportion of that money.
I think if I can, and I'm only reading from what
Yes.
Sir Anton Muscatelli published and the letter that he wrote, but he states, when additional funding is announced for English universities via Research England, in general the Scottish Government receives corresponding funding through the Barnett formula, which we all accept and understand. These uplifts need to be passed on in full to the Scottish Funding Council. So he's suggesting that when money is given from the UK Government to UKRI, and then that Barnett consequential is then given from the UK Government to the Scottish Government, you're not getting that full share. Is that correct?
So our funding for research has been set out of the Scottish Government on a 5-year trajectory from the capital spending review, where I think we're just about to go into year 4 of that. There are some times when UKRI receives in-year funding as a result of, I guess, new announcements that come in. And I guess in my experience, there have been a couple of those in the last year that have been passed on to Scottish universities. I think that has not always been the case.
And why is that then? Why? Obviously, they're political decisions.
Because, I think that's a choice for the Scottish Government as to where it uses its Barnett formula. It does not have to pass that on to research and innovation. Recently, it has chosen to, and we and Scottish universities have welcomed that.
When they don't, when you're looking at that from the Scottish Funding Council, seeing the money going from the UK Government to Research England, and you're expecting X amount to come, what do you do when it doesn't? What representations do you make to the Scottish Government when you don't get that passed on in full?
So I think that when there's an opportunity, for in-year funding to come to the Scottish Funding Council, we do show the Scottish Government what we would do with that money.
He says from 2016 to 2017, the kind of financial year 16-17 to 22-23, the combined total of research and university innovation funding in Scotland provided by the Scottish Funding Council increased by 7%. That's welcome. But he says that's well below the equivalent Research England core funding streams, which increased by around 30%. That's quite a gulf between those two figures. So are we suffering as a result of that compared to the rest of the United Kingdom?
So I don't think that you can necessarily take that from those figures, because we don't choose to split our funding in exactly the same way in Scotland as it is in England. We don't just follow down the same path. Mm-hmm. We have 3 core funding streams in Scotland. We have REG, which is by far the biggest, which is the equivalent of, I guess, QR in England in terms of purpose. We have UIF, which is the equivalent of the innovation funding stream in England, and we also have a stream of funding called RPG for postgraduate students. Research England also, I guess, has other unhypothecated pots of funding, but most of our funding is driven through those 3 streams, and they are not in the same proportions as in Scotland as in England. When we set our funding, we consult with the institutions, and I guess they give us their preferences as to how they'd like it to be allocated, and of course we discuss that with the Scottish Government.
Were you aware of that letter and those figures from?
I was aware of those figures, yes.
So how did you respond to that? Because obviously that was a letter to the Scottish Government back in October. You've had several months now. Have you met with?
That figure is in data that is shared with SFC. We are aware of those figures.
Yeah,
and
my question is, what do you do when you see that in the media? This is someone who is just highlighting how they would obviously want, and everyone wants more investment. So what do you do when that's in the media, when you've got principals of Scottish universities writing to the Scottish Government? Are you backing the principal of Glasgow University here? Are you supporting the Scottish Government's decision not to pass that money on? Or what do you believe is the role of the Scottish Funding Council?
So I think that it's absolutely Sir Anton's privilege to make that case to the Scottish Government. We are an agency of the Scottish Government, and obviously we make representations about what we would do with an increased funding pot, but you have to you have to respect their ability to be able to direct consequentials as they see fit.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean you can't fully endorse what the principal of Glasgow University is saying because you're an agency of the Scottish Government?
So I think that I respect his right to make the case for additional funding. That is his job.
Mm-hmm. But it's additional funding that you could then spend if that's successful.
Well, if he would spend it, I would give it back.
Yes, you could you could give out more money if he was successful. So you would endorse that?
I support his right to do that.
Okay. Maybe a question for you both, and we'll come to Professor Corner first. I think it was just last week when we had the Minister in. We were speaking particularly about AI and the advancements of AI. Are you seeing an increase through UKRI and through Scottish Funding Council for research and innovation in the AI field? Because it is growing by the day. It brings with it many challenges, but also opportunities. I think the UK government's evidence suggested that Edinburgh will be home to the largest number of students and people studying AI and such like going forward. So Scotland has a real opportunity going forward. I wonder, are you seeing an increase in interest in this field, and are you providing grants associated with that increased interest?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the priority technologies in the science and technology framework, and there's been significant additional funding directed absolutely towards AI, and some of those awards have already been made. Yeah, and you just mentioned one of them. So yes, it is high priority. There are schemes being developed and implemented to support the development of that area. Very, very important. And then on the ground, I think there's a lot of activity with great. I mean, it's computer science is one of the most attractive subjects, and the interest in it is growing very quickly. But still, actually, we're going to need very well trained people, and we probably can't keep pace with the demand. So, yes, I think you could say it is a very high priority area.
The line I was looking for from the UK government's evidence of inquiry was the University of Edinburgh. It houses the largest pool of AI researchers in Europe, and that obviously presents an opportunity for what we can do in Scotland, but also the challenges for getting people with those skills to be able to come in there. I wonder how the Scottish Funding Council viewed the increase in interest and those challenges and opportunities within AI.
So explained previously, most of our funding to universities is unhypothecated, which means that they get to use it to underpin other opportunities. But one of the few areas that we have made a specific investment is in the Data Lab, which is an innovation centre, which is about, I guess, bringing data and AI skills, innovation to new and existing businesses, and we definitely see it as an opportunity, I guess, not just at the cutting edge, but actually throughout the business space in Scotland, I guess to power economic growth in the future.
And when we spoke to the Scottish Government Minister last week, Graham Day, I think he accepted, as we all did, the challenges in Scotland, but not unique to Scotland, and indeed they are across the UK and many other parts of Europe and the world, just about people studying STEM subjects at the moment. But there is, quite a worrying shortage of STEM teachers in Scotland, and actually particularly the number of women who study STEM subjects and then continue in that sector. Is this something you see on your risk registers, anything as a threat going forward, that maybe Scotland in discussion with the UK and what we can do around the United Kingdom about the number of people taking STEM subjects, for example?
That's very interesting. STEM's been a high priority subject for a long period of time, so I don't know specifically about the issues in Scotland in relation to shortage, so that's...
So you talk about it as a threat. Actually, it's the most enormous opportunity. If we look at all of the I guess the skills gaps and the places where we've got if we just took the fair share of women that are not continuing these subjects through, we would fill so many of those gaps. I think that
clarifying, when I say threat, it's the threat that they're not doing that.
Yes, exactly.
That's what I meant by that. Yeah, just to be clear.
So I think there have been changes, I guess, like at school level in terms of people going through and then into university first degrees. You know, we have seen changes over the last 10 years in the proportions of women in those subjects. And if we could just sort of carry that forward one step at a time, then I think it would be a real, I guess, supercharge for opportunities.
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Chair.
David Chuckett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both witnesses for coming in. There's so much been discussed already that I'm dying to come back into. I might touch on a few things, but I wanted to, if I may, Professor Corner, actually take you back 3 years, if you can remember that far back. I can't believe it is 3 years ago, but there was a. Sorry, I've got to take my glasses off so I can read here. There was the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, and £171 million paid through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, specifically for decarbonisation projects across the UK. Now, if it's not ringing any bells yet, the reason I bring that up is about 31 million of that came to the so-called Scottish cluster, the Acorn Carbon Capture and Storage project. And the reason I'm maybe fixating on that a little bit is it's the Acorn project sits in Ferguson, my constituency.
Right.
But do you remember that at all, the funding mechanism or the announcement?
I certainly remember the funding mechanism. It was before my time at UKRI, just to say, so I wasn't involved in it, but
okay.
Yes.
Okay, but you're aware of it?
Yes.
In that case, my question's actually to Ms Cross, because, well, you were both reflecting earlier on the fact that UKRI focuses on funding innovation in businesses, or Innovate UK, I should say, focuses on investing in businesses, where you focus on learning institutions. But at about the same time, or it was maybe a little bit after that, the Scottish Government said they were going to invest 80 million in the same project. And I'm just wondering what mechanism is open to the Scottish Government to do the same, effectively do the same thing, if there is such a thing.
So
if they wanted, so if the Scottish Government said we're going to invest 80 million in an industrial process and innovation in that process.
In terms of research and innovation, it's a complicated landscape because it is part reserved and part devolved. And what actually that means is for most activities, the UK government ministers and the Scottish Government have the same powers, I would say.
Right.
So in terms of being able to fund projects and programmes to advance research and innovation, they have the same powers. In terms of industrial decarbonisation, I don't know, I guess, the details of what sort of projects and programmes that could be funded. But in general, the Scottish Government would have the choice, as similar choices as the UK Government, into how to implement.
So in principle, there
this.
wouldn't be, for example, and I'm not saying this is an argument the Scottish Government have made, but if they were, there isn't a barrier from a point of view of they can't do it because it's reserved to the UK Parliament or UK Government. They could invest that money if they wanted to.
They could, yeah, and in fact there are examples of joint co-investment in initiatives, so that does happen. So I don't know the specifics of that particular example, but
I just wonder, I mean, I know one of the things that has been discussed already is the previous witnesses have said that there's certainly an opportunity for improvement in how well the two governments can cooperate, so there's maybe something there. And on the subject of barriers, I'm just wondering, and again, we discussed earlier the fact that UKRI funding, and again going back to Minister Griffith's evidence last week, when he said the success rate of applications is actually quite good in Scotland, but there's fewer people coming forward to make the applications. And I was wondering if either of you or both of you could give us some clear indication of where you think, if they exist, what the barriers are to Scottish businesses or Scottish education institutions to actually step up and apply for those funds.
Do you want me to say something broader first? It's almost this isn't a thing that is unique to Scotland. It is UK-wide. So people talk about the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge and London, and in fact their success rates are not noticeably different to Scotland's success rates. What is different is the quantum, the number of people, the number of researchers, the number of R&D active businesses. So in order to have greater success in Scotland, we need to grow our activity, but that can't be just everybody working harder and churning out more applications. You have to preserve the quality. And I think in Scotland we should be proud of our world-class, internationally renowned institutions, but also recognise that they are, I guess, smaller than the biggest ones in England, even Edinburgh, our biggest institution. And actually that means we sometimes have to do things differently, and that's why at SFC one of the things we try to do is incentivise collaboration as well as competition, to make sure that actually we can apply for those biggest opportunities and really see the main prize.
And Professor?
Yeah,
Corner.
well, I think we've been talking about it perhaps all afternoon, the various things that need to happen to make sure that all opportunities are taken as much as they can. I think, we need to think about people capacity, facilities, infrastructure. All of those things would need to be addressed to scale up, if that's what the perception is, that that's what's needed. It may be that the difference isn't as big as we think it is, as it first appears. But certainly it is probably scale, but it will also be about capability and capacity, which needs to grow as well. So it's not just a matter of putting money in.
Well,
you've got to have the people to do the work, the facilities and the infrastructure to make that work.
Certainly England compared to Scotland, you've got a larger population, so more stuff is going to happen in England. There's maybe more concentration of different organisations that can come together and collaborate, as you say. It's something I've seen in many industries, many industrial sectors. Competing organisations actually coming together to collaborate, at least at some sort of level, usually ends up the sum being equal, or more than the outcome being more than the sum of the individual parts. So there's definitely something there. But I just wondered if we might want to go back to the data that we've looked at previously, or the evidence we've been looked at previously, to see where if it's the number of applications per head of population, that kind of thing. So we'll maybe look back on that.
And we have data that we could, if it's helpful to the committee, that we're happy to provide more data than we perhaps talked about this afternoon, if that would be useful.
That's available, yes, that could be really helpful. But again, generally we've heard that funding, or what we have heard from previous witnesses, is that funding has increased at a greater rate in England than in Scotland. Is that something you would recognise?
I think it depends on what data set you look at, in what dimension. It's not all uniform. I think we've separated out the business end from some of the research.
So again, I'm just going by what witnesses
end,
have told us, and I'm sort of repeating their words back at you a little bit, because they've also told us that English universities can access more pots of funding, because again, for some of the issues you just described, giving them an advantage in REF assessments perhaps. But we've also heard that Scottish universities may be disadvantaged due to their lower incomes from domestic students. And is that something you recognise?
So in terms of the, I guess, how the finances work in universities in Scotland, obviously that is slightly different because we pay money for each student, whereas in the domestic student coming through, whereas in England that comes from fees. But Scottish institutions obviously have a balance of domestic students, students from the rest of the UK and international students. Overall, that leads to a tighter environment, but it is managed differently.
So you wouldn't recognise that, again, I'll just read it out again, that Scottish universities, I don't remember where we had this from, I'm just quoting here that with the Scottish universities may be disadvantaged due to their lower incomes from domestic students. Is that because the income for those students is actually funded, but it's funded through the government?
So the funding that comes through the Scottish Government for each student place is less than the UK fee.
Okay. I think I'm clear on that. So you're basically saying it doesn't matter whether it's funded by a fee or funded by the government. The universities get funded either way.
The universities get funded either way, but the
unit of resource.
The unit resource is less when it's coming through the central grant than it is through a fee.
Okay. All right. I think that's all I was going to ask at this point.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I ask my first question about the REF and the proposed changes to the REF? And if I can come to you first, Ms Cross. Given that there's, REG is a big part of the Scottish Funding Council's means of dispersing, what's your thoughts on the REF changes and some of the concerns that have been raised to this committee?
So, I guess what I would say is we, unfortunately, you've picked two people and we are one on the REF, because we are working together to develop it, but we're also working with the community to develop it. Now, when you have a lever that is as important and big as the REF, it's important to get it right. And people are concerned that changes may disadvantage them, but there are also people that recognise that it's an enormous opportunity for change. We're listening carefully and looking to pilot those changes and make sure that we're doing it in a way that is, fair to all the institutions that want to participate.
And well, then I'll come to you then, Professor Corner. Are you hearing similar concerns to what we've heard in relation to Scottish institutions over the changes to REF?
Yeah, so there's been a whole process of consultation, open consultation, and a lot of listening. And we've heard a whole variety, actually, of different views. Some of those which is sort of concerned about change and not wanting to sort of, change a system that seems to have worked well, but also recognising there are some great opportunities to change the kind of emphasis around what we think is important in developing a very healthy research system that supports talent and all the other things that need to happen in great research. So on the basis of all of the input that we have announced that we're going to delay the REF a year so that we can give it more time. Particularly, we're very interested to make sure that institutions can switch to putting their data in via what we call the Higher Education Statistics Authority system, rather than sending us lists of staff, which was the arrangement before. And also to pilot the changes so that everybody develops confidence that they're designed well and institutions can respond. So I think we're doing everything that we can to listen, but also it's a co-designed, it's always designed in partnership with universities so that we get it right, because it's for everybody. It's a community-driven...
Everybody wants that best opportunity.
2029 now, not 2028.
Great, thank you. Just following up from some of the questions that Douglas Ross was asking in response to the letter from the principal of Glasgow University, I just wanted to check, obviously, the funding, so Innovate UK were very clear as for business, but the Research England's Higher Education Innovation Fund is for institutions in England, and the SFC's University Innovation Fund is the equivalent in Scotland, and I'm assuming the Research Wales Innovation Fund is the equivalent in Wales. Can I just ask, in terms of Wales, do we have a clear view on whether the money that they use in their innovation fund is a direct layover from the Barnett consequentials that arise from Research England? Do we know that? I don't know, Professor Corner, if you can respond.
I am aware. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what the Welsh Government gets in Barnett consequentials as a result of
the model, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
However, it's not matched innovation fund to innovation fund.
No. Okay.
So obviously, in general, how Barnett consequentials work is that the total amount of funding that is, I guess, funded on an England-only basis in a particular area goes through the Treasury to the
Yes.
Scottish Government. I guess we don't have a detailed accounting of how that.
I suppose what I'm just trying to
would
get to, and
translate.
it was the same as Douglas Ross was, is that obviously Barnett consequentials, it's up to the Welsh Government and the Scottish Government what they choose to do with that. What Douglas was getting at was the fact that the Scottish Government maybe haven't used everything that they could have used for the Innovation Fund in Scotland, and I suppose I'm just asking, has the Welsh Government made a similar decision? And it sounds like perhaps they haven't.
They've also had a period without an innovation fund where they determined not to have it. So
The Welsh
data showing them without, which is quite
Okay.
an interesting experiment.
I suppose what we're trying to just get to the bottom of is we did have Professor Boswell from University of Scotland who said that Edinburgh University would be receiving $5 million a year for innovation if it was based in England, whereas it received $1.7 million being based in Scotland. And what I feel that I've heard this afternoon is that's because the Scottish Government have made different decisions in relation to their innovation fund as opposed to anything that UKRI could have done. Have I got that right?
One thing that I can't tell you all the detail of this, but it's not to say, and I don't know the detail, and Helen might know more than me, but just because it isn't flowing to universities doesn't mean that it's not necessarily spent on innovation. It might be going through other mechanisms, to other entities to do a job that's in the innovation space. So I suppose the answer is it's very hard to tell where innovation funding is going and how it's being deployed.
And obviously it's University of Scotland's right to come here in front of this committee and say that there's a disparity when they're looking at that fund as opposed to across the whole piece.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So universities are one mechanism by which Scottish Government could decide to deploy that resource, but Helen might know more. So it isn't just a straight comparison, really, is it?
Yes, but I suppose what we're looking at as a committee is how do we help support? So it's good to get that clarity. Ms Cross, is there anything?
For universities to do the best they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms Cross, then you would want to add then?
No, I think I would be repeating myself to say we make the choice of how it's distributed across our three funds, and that balance is different to the balance that it is in England, but that's been on the advice of universities.
I'm starting to get a bit confused here. My understanding of the situation, and obviously I know Professor Muscatelli's letter, is that Scotland has its own priorities and its own funding environment, and obviously funding becomes available through Barnett consequentials that will be applied according to the priorities of the Scottish Government. Is that roughly where we are with that?
Yes. That is exactly it, yeah. I mean, I suppose what you're hearing is a very strong case.
All of it should go
specifically. If innovation funding goes specifically to universities, you can see that there will be an outcome from that we have probably
it's in universities' interest, obviously, as Professor Muscatelli demonstrated, to try and advocate to get that money exclusively, even though it's possibly just going into different funding arrangements and streams to meet the specific environment in Scotland. Just trying to be helpful.
Absolutely. And I suppose from our perspective, Chair, it has been pointed out as an evidence that there is a different, in terms of cash growth between 2014, there has been a variance, but you're right to point that out. So the other piece of evidence we've heard is just that, and David Duke mentioned this, was accessing more pots of funding. One pot that was raised to us was the Strengths and Places Fund and how beneficial it had been to Scottish researchers. Indeed, it was. We were told that a quarter of the funding from Strength and Places had went to Scotland. Professor Corner, are there plans for similar funds in the future, given that fund has now ended?
So, well, I'm delighted to be the lead responsible officer for Strength in Places Fund for UKRI. At the moment, that was an allocation that was this spending review. So the funds have been allocated, and it's great to be evaluating all the good things that's coming of it, of which the schemes in Scotland are excellent examples. It will be for the next spending review to decide what sort of schemes might be great to put in place, and we will be putting forward arguments for, or cases to be made for, different kinds of schemes, but certainly Strength in Places will be a strong example that we might want to put forward.
Sounds like you've written a recommendation for this committee's report then. Thank you very much both. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. To James, Jessica, what is the UKRI doing to support IROs who may be particularly disadvantaged by the 80-20 funding model?
Yes, so UKRI has been looking at about research organisations and how the different models have been playing out for universities versus the research institutes and other organisations, and is looking to tweak the model a bit to make sure that it supports their needs. It's been working that through. It's been analysing data and making sure that they are on a reasonable playing field relative to others. They are funded differently, so it's not that they don't get underpinning funding to support their infrastructures. Universities get it through QR, research organisations get it through another mechanism, but it's just looking to make sure that the model works for both and it's a reasonably level playing field, so that work's underway.
One of the things we heard is that IROs in Scotland are in need of more long-term funding in order to ensure stability in their work. Is that something you recognise?
Well, it's not actually my area of expertise, to be honest, because I look after universities more than I look after them. But again, we could follow up with some answers to your question if you'd like more detail.
Great, thanks. And Helen Cross.
So I do talk to the Scottish Government, including Professor Fitzpatrick, who you had here last week, quite regularly about the whole ecosystem in Scotland. And I think, I guess it's recognising that it is different for IROs in that they don't have the same streams of fundings as universities have, I guess, to match fund and build a portfolio of research. But again, they do, when they're bidding competitive funding, they do need to make sure that funding is aligned with their core mission, and therefore it makes sense that they also have to, I guess, pay a contribution towards undertaking that research.
That's great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just briefly, just going back to the spin-out arrangements with universities, we spoke to a number of the small businesses that were benefiting from the arrangements that is offered by universities. But I'm just wondering, is the model always the same, where it's the university, the higher education institute, that holds on to the intellectual property and licenses it to the businesses which they're supporting? Is that always the case, and is that the same internationally?
They're all, I mean, each particular discovery technology that's being commercialised will have a different arrangement, to be honest. And there are different ways of working in commercialisation. Sometimes it's around a contract with industry to develop that technology, and it's not a spin-out company at all. It's not managed like that.
I was specifically referring to the spin-out arrangements in universities, where the university holds on to the intellectual property and licenses it.
Right.
Is that roughly the model that you would expect if you were at university?
It's broad. There are some slight differences by country, but mostly it's the model is very similar. Some of the debate is around the share of equity that's split between the university, the company, and so on, and maybe and then investors as it goes forward. And as I was saying earlier, there are differences of opinion of what that should look like. In the life sciences sector, there's been the 10U work that has come up with a kind of best practice guide around the terms.
Because that was exactly what I wanted to get into. When we had a series of meetings with some of the companies that were in this type of arrangement at universities, and it was all dependent upon the type of advice that they were able to secure from the HEI. And what we got was quite a lot of dissatisfaction with the advice that was being offered and the licensing arrangement that was put in place. And I think there was a sense that things and arrangements could have been better. It could have favoured the company a little bit more than the higher education institution. I just wondered, are we getting this right in terms of how we're getting the structure in place, and are these the right type of arrangements to fully support the spin-out and the commercialisation of these hopefully wonderful products that we're...
Yeah, so the Tracy and Williamson independent review of spin-out explored all of this in a lot of detail. We
need to read that properly, is probably what you're suggesting, yes.
It's a complicated area. There are many views and there are many constituents, but I think they did a very thorough job at going to talk to all parties and then come to some recommendations which are in their report, which I think are broadly, I think all the community accept as being the right direction of travel.
To go. So, okay,
Yeah.
Wendy, do you want to
Yeah, just very briefly on the chair there. The other thing that came across to me very strongly when we had those round tables was the number of biomedical spin-offs there were who found it very difficult to really get any traction within the NHS. Is that something that you've picked up?
It's your background, I'll let you to...
Well, I mean, again, and that's a whole other area really to talk about. But of course, you know, the regulation of developing drugs and other technologies for use in health is a complicated business, and yes, and the NHS can be quite a complicated area to.
It just felt that we ended. Yeah, it just felt like something where companies were ending up going overseas because they just couldn't get anywhere in terms of clinical trials or anywhere with the NHS, which is obviously very frustrating for us to hear.
Yeah, and I think there is UK-wide collaborative sort of conversation going on about how to support that area, actually, which again, it might be of interest to the committee to.
It's definitely.
A bit more.
Just very lastly, we started this inquiry because we were encouraged to do this because of Scotland's excellence in history as a creative nation and the inventions we've brought to the table. I mean, looking at where we are just now, we've obviously heard from a number of companies and we've had very encouraging news about where we are. Do we think, are we in a good situation and position in Scotland? Do we still tend to be world leading? And you know, are we matching our history and culture when it comes to scientific research?
We should both try and answer that, shouldn't we? But I would say the Research Excellence Framework, the REF that reported in 2021, would tell you that it is very strong and that there is excellent research going on across institutions in Scotland that performed, you know, among the best in the world. That process also evaluated and checked whether the peer review process that REF does actually measured against other indicators of global standing, and it did. So I think it's a very strong picture. That's not to say that we shouldn't keep our eye on it and make sure we're doing everything that we can to make sure it thrives in future. But Helen, you might have something specific to say.
So I think since I've come back to Scotland, what I've been also excited about is the difference that research and innovation is making to Scotland, and that's everything from sort of social research that reduces youth reoffending, you know, to, I guess, remote sensing that can help people manage heart conditions when they live very rurally. And those examples kind of really brought home to me what a difference our research and innovation community is making to the people of Scotland.
Excellent. On that very positive note, I think we'll leave it for that this afternoon. But thank you very much for coming down for this rearranged session. And I think there's a couple of things you said you might get back to us. We'll look forward to receiving that from both of you. But for this afternoon, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.